look at the downtown parking study as well as the truck route study. And we are working on this in partnership with Carpenter Marty, a consulting firm who is assisting us on the truck route study. So I'm joined today by my other Kimley Horn consultant partners, Andrew Wainwright, Nat Hayward, and Samantha Borges. So I appreciate everybody being a part of this today. And then on the client side, I just wanted to give the folks from Kiowa just an opportunity to introduce yourselves as well.
Yeah, this is Salim Salame, the Deputy Director for Kiowa.
And Bethany Wild with Kiowa.
Hi, this is Terry Sticking with Kiowa.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Let's go ahead and jump in. What we're going to do is just give a little bit of information about the downtown Huntington parking study as well as the truck route study. For those of you all that were part of our stakeholder meeting earlier, you're going to hear some things that sound familiar, but we are also going to have a couple of interactive polling questions. So just to change it up a little bit. So you can go ahead and prime the pump with your phone or with your computer. You just have to go to www.menti.com and we have an access code here, or you can also scan this QR code that's up on screen. The website as well as the access code will actually pop back up every time that we have a polling question that comes up. So it'll be the same one throughout. So if you put it in once, it should work for the entire presentation. So I'll give folks just, let's go ahead and jump in on talking about the downtown Huntington multimodal parking study. And as I said, tonight's workshop is going to focus on two different studies. They've been running concurrently. Our downtown Huntington multimodal parking study is just that, focusing on the downtown Huntington area and thinking about it specific to the parking needs within that downtown zone, and also about some potential recommendations for improvement. And then we'll talk about that first. Following that, we'll be talking about the City of Huntington truck route study, where we were taking a look at some of the specific truck routes within the area. So let's go ahead and start with the downtown Huntington multimodal parking study. And I'll turn things over to Nat and Samantha to talk this through.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate that. So it's a great tee up. Like Allison said, we conducted a parking study for downtown Huntington. So our study area kind of largely consisted of the downtown area from east to west. It's about 4th Street to 24th Street, and from south to north, that's from the river to about 8th Avenue, or sorry, north to south. And what we wanted to do, the purpose of our study was really to focus on kind of looking at parking in downtown Huntington kind of through a more modern lens. And what I mean by that is that our goal was to kind of view the parking system not just in a vacuum, but as a look at it comprehensively as sort of an element of one of the elements that is integrated with all of the things that make downtown Huntington so great now, and the vision for downtown Huntington in the future. And so some of our goals with the study were to really kind of identify those kind of critical parking issues that exist now, and identify some opportunities and for change and challenges, and to kind of build the foundation for potential changes to the future for parking management. We want to kind of understand and consider kind of current supply and demand of parking, understand how kind of mobility is really critical to the parking system, and we want to develop kind of strategies for implementation for the recommendations that we developed through the study. So our process for the study was really pretty simple. Like most planning processes, we really start to organize around kind of understanding our current conditions, and we do this by kind of developing and gathering quantitative and qualitative data. And so we had a team go out and conduct parking occupancy counts in high demand parking areas. We conducted research of peer communities comparable and aspirational for Huntington. We identified those sort of challenges and opportunities for change. And then we go into our sort of recommendation development phase. And so we're kind of taking all of that sort of existing condition stuff, packaging it together with our input from the public and kind of critical stakeholders and partner agencies. And we're using that foundation to really develop recommendations for the parking and mobility in downtown Huntington. And then it's about taking all that information and packaging it together in a clear and attractive document that can be used as a guide for the city for parking in downtown Huntington. And then throughout that whole process, there's opportunities for input from stakeholders, partner agencies, and the public through a variety of different means. And I want to tee up Sam here to kind of talk about sort of that first sort of current conditions phase of our work.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. So as Nat mentioned, we had a lot of data points that went into what we are calling kind of our key takeaways, some of the observations and challenges that we found through that data collection, that peer city research, getting that occupancy data, and then some of that more qualitative data from talking to stakeholders and from a public survey that ran just a couple months ago. So from that, we have these key takeaways kind of layered in these three categories. The first being infrastructure, any perceived challenges there. A big one we found is parking issues during special events. Some might be that we're actually being underutilized in some areas, some existing surface and deck parking. Another category we have is information. This is looking at any signage that may be lacking out there in order to direct people to parking effectively and efficiently. And we also found that there's lacking online information for people to be able to look and see how and where they can park at any given time. And then finally, we look at behavior, because it's often not just about the supply, even though that's supply and demand is important. It's also about how people perceive the supply that's out there. And so we kind of found that some of our parking fines are too low to change some behavior, and also that really these perceptions of parking supply impact people's behaviors. And so largely what we found is that there are pockets of places that have high demand parking that are maybe a little bit more strained, by bars and restaurants, areas where that parking is a little tighter, but then there's also largely a lot of supply in other areas that isn't being as utilized. And so these key takeaways really built into how we developed our 6 recommendations that are listed here. And I'll let Nat go into the details of each of these recommendations, kind of talking about what they are and the intended benefits for each of them. But we have these 6 ones that we really think kind of get at the parking issues and any recommendations that we can have for the downtown area.
Yeah, Sam did a great job kind of teeing that up. So like I said, as she kind of went through those key takeaways, that really represents the foundation on which we build our recommendations for the plan. As any good planning process goes, this isn't just about a couple planners sitting in a room, scratching up some recommendations and presenting them. It's really based on all of those sort of key takeaways that Sam mentioned, that's based on all that sort of existing analysis that we've done. And so what we did within the document is, like Sam said, we identified these kind of 6 most critical recommendations, and we went into some pretty good detail with each one. And so for each recommendation, we've sort of identified some pros and cons, some challenges, and some benefits for the recommendation. We've identified kind of key partnerships that it'll take to get the recommendation implemented. We've identified some potential costs for implementing from a resource perspective. That's time and financial resources. We also related each recommendation back to the results from our community survey. We had over 250 responses on our community survey, and so again, reiterating the point that that our recommendations are based on sort of the public's vision for the future and those needs that are identified through the current conditions analysis process. We kind of showcase those results that are most relevant for each recommendation here. We identify some kind of performance metrics that can be used to measure the progress and the effectiveness of each recommendation moving forward. And then the two big ones are we identify steps for implementation, providing the city with sort of a guide for implementing each recommendation, as well as a set of spatial recommendations. So you can see a map here on the screen, this zone priority map. We've sort of broke downtown into kind of 4 kind of key zones because we understand that one recommendation may not be as important in a certain area of downtown versus another. So there's a little bit of granularity, a little bit of nuance here that we're playing with. So for our first recommendation, increased parking fines. Sam mentioned that right now parking fines are really low, especially as you compare them to peer cities or aspirational cities to Huntington. We know that our fines here are too low, and what we've seen and what we've heard is that the fines are so low, in fact, that it doesn't discourage people from violating parking rules. Someone is much more willing to pay a few dollar fine to park somewhere 3 times as long as they're allowed to, because the fines are so low. And what that does, it's not just about getting the city or the parking system more revenue. It's about creating a parking system that is consistent with the economic vibrancy that we want to see downtown. Those highest demand areas that are right in front of our kind of critical commercial spaces, restaurants, shops, offices, those high demand spaces are the ones that yield the most economic benefit for the city. So the more turnover we see in those spaces, the more everyone benefits in downtown. And what Sam mentioned some of this as well, and what our data showed was that even if we're encouraging people not to park in those highest demand spaces, there's plenty of parking supply very close by. It's just about making sure people are aware that it's there and getting them there. So increasing parking fines can help sort of encourage those parking behaviors that we know are going to be most important to continuing to create a more vibrant downtown. Right along with that, we also want to look at restricting time limits in some of those high demand areas. And so this is another tool we can use to encourage specific parking behaviors to create more high turnover, reduce parking congestion in our high demand areas. This has huge benefits for economic development and economic gains for businesses that want to see high turnover in parking near their front door, and it also encourages a more balanced parking system, better utilization across all of our different parking facilities. One thing that we know is really critical when we look at parking is that it's especially in downtown areas like Huntington, is that it's not just about finding the spot that's right in front of the front door that you want to walk in. Like we said, we want to create a more balanced system, create a more vibrant downtown area. This means that people may need to walk a block or a half a block from their parking to their destination. And what we know is that people are going to be less likely to do that, if they don't know where the parking is or how to get to their destination from their parking. And so we can utilize clear and effective wayfinding signage, online resources, so that people, even before they come into downtown, they know where their parking is in relation to their destination, and they can use signage to navigate to their parking when they get into downtown, and they can use wayfinding signage to connect from their parking to their destination on foot. This is really critical to creating a safer downtown, making sure that people aren't going to get lost on their way to their destination, and are following the sort of correct and safe pathways to make that happen. It also reduces congestion. If people enter downtown and know right where they're going to get to their parking destination, it's going to create less congestion in downtown and make everything safer and more efficient. One thing Sam noted as well is that there's a clear need to look at special events downtown. We know that Marshall University has tons of special events, football games, other university events that are critical, that create strain on the parking system. We know the areas in the riverfront that have their own special events that we need to have a parking system that can accommodate that. And the way to do that is not through creating as much supply as we ever would possibly need for those events, but it's for creating a plan so that when those events take place, that there's a system in place to allow for efficient and use of parking and effective arrival and departure for those places. So this is potentially blocking off certain streets or guiding people to certain parking areas depending on the event. This is improving wayfinding even more for people who may not be used to the downtown area that are coming in for those events. It's also going to encourage more people to attend events downtown that might not otherwise, if they find it easy to get in and out of downtown for their event without getting stuck in traffic. And it's going to reduce potential for parking violations as well. Those people that come in for those events, they might have a hard time finding parking now. They may not know where it is, and so this tends to create situations where people park in violation, and we don't want them to do that. They don't want to do that, and so if we have a special event parking plan in place that gives people the tools to park effectively and efficiently, it's only going to improve all of that. Our fifth recommendation has to do with new development opportunities. So right now we know that in downtown that there are a couple new development opportunities, and there's certainly some in the future that we don't know about now. And we know that there aren't a ton of restrictions on parking requirements for development downtown currently. But what we would suggest, and what we've seen as successful in other places, is that we look at parking maximums. And what this means is that currently you might have, for every X square foot of development, you might have Y parking spaces required as a minimum. What we've seen a lot of places doing successfully is that they've been, instead of creating a minimum parking requirement, they've been creating a maximum requirement so that not too much parking is built. What this is going to do is it's going to allow us in downtown Huntington to utilize our supply that we already have. We know that there's a lot of underutilized supply that's really easily accessible and in near high demand locations. And it's going to save developable land for other opportunities. Anytime we're building a surface lot or a parking garage, it costs a lot of resources to get that done, and it's also taking up kind of prime developable land in downtown that could otherwise be used for other new developments. And so creating some potentially utilizing some parking maximums in some of those high demand development areas can be really helpful for kind of creating a more balanced system throughout and creating better efficient use of our space in downtown. And then finally, our last recommendation is kind of a common thread that you've seen throughout, is to improve kind of our pedestrian connectivity from our destination to our parking and vice versa. And so again, we know that safety is a really critical thing here in downtown Huntington. We know that people want to be able to, if we want people to utilize some of our more underutilized parking facilities that may be a block or half block or two away from our destination, we need to make it safe and easy for them to get there. And this also goes with ADA accessibility as well. This is really critical to encouraging people to continue to come downtown and helps kind of fuel the economy of downtown as a whole. In addition to that, the ADA requirements, and it's also a more equitable strategy, allowing for kind of people of all ages and abilities to access our parking system easily and get to their destinations easily. And so with that, we can go to our online Mentimeter poll here.
Yeah, if anyone would like to participate, at the top of the screen, you can just go to www.menti.com and use the code up there. And then we have a question here asking participants here to kind of rank the parking recommendations as they see fit, which ones they like the best, which ones they think are best to prioritize, just based on the recommendations information that we've given here today. Seems like they're all tied. They're staying tied here. There we go. Yeah, so we can see here that improving wayfinding and some of those online resources and information seems to be the top one, which is a pretty good first one to have, because that's likely one that can be implemented a little bit quicker, a little bit cheaper than some of the others, just depending on which ones. And I think something that'll be added to the report, kind of in addition to this priority ranking that we're doing here with stakeholders in the public, is in the report will also be assigning priority rankings to these recommendations. You know, what's best to be done in the near term, what can we do in the midterm, and what maybe is some of those longer term recommendations that we can implement in the longer time frame.
Yeah, I think Sam hit on a good point with this recommendation that came up first here. You know, this is really a great sort of low-hanging fruit kind of implementation item that we've already got the infrastructure in place. There's already signage that may just need to be improved or added to some. There's already online resources that just need to be improved and added to. And so it's just about sort of rolling up the sleeves and kind of getting that work done. And so that's something that can also be used to kind of create momentum to implement more of the recommendations from this plan. If we can kind of quickly jump in and get some of that done soon, it shows momentum and it shows some success, and allows us to move forward with implementing some of the other recommendations as well.
All right, I think from there we can touch on now our Huntington truck route study.
And I should add, if anybody has any particular comments that you want to offer, if you wanted to just throw those in the chat box, that would be great. That way they're kind of preserved as we go along. But yeah, I think that it's really interesting kind of looking at this from an implementability standpoint. And I like seeing some of that wayfinding coming to the top, as well as some things that we can do from a policy standpoint to start to kind of better prepare the parking areas going forward. So as Sam mentioned, let's go ahead and pivot over to the Huntington truck route study. To set the stage for this study a little bit. The intent of this study was to get a better understanding of what some of the current truck travel patterns are within the city of Huntington. So we know that there are certainly many attraction points for truck traffic within the city, and that the city also remains an important through travel area for many truck trips as well. And so understanding what those current truck travel patterns are, but going beyond that to also understand what ultimately the preferred truck routing would be within the city to optimize that truck travel efficiency going forward. So to do that, we've taken a look at identifying those existing truck routes, the patterns that trucks are taking as they go through the city, recommending a preferred truck route network, and then within that truck route network, thinking about ways where investment could be made to further improve the truck travel experience. And so we'll just go through a little bit of the process that went through in actually developing all of this, and I'll turn things over to Andrew to talk that through.
Thanks, Allison. So the first thing that we did as part of the study to sort of arrive at those recommendations was to look at existing designated truck routes within the city. So to do that, we pulled the existing designated truck routes as defined by the West Virginia Department of Transportation. And that's what's shown in the map above. So all state, US, and interstate highways are designated as truck routes, as well as some less traveled local roads that do not have any truck restrictions on them. So that's what's shown in the map above. Next slide, please. And once we had an idea of where the existing designated truck routes were, we began to look at where trucks were traveling the most. And we pulled average daily traffic counts, truck percentages, and then ultimately daily truck volumes from the West Virginia Department of Transportation. The map on this slide shows the roadway segments with the highest relative daily truck volumes within the city. And I've highlighted the highest daily truck volume road segments in that table there. And what this map is showing here, the orange is the highest third of daily truck volume roadway segments, and green is the bottom third as well. So a few things to highlight, some of the major east-west routes, such as 3rd, 5th, and 8th Avenue, as well as Washington and Adams, had some of the highest daily truck volumes within the city, as well as the north and south entry points to and from the city, like 64, US 52, US 60, SR 506, as well as Hauger Boulevard and SR 527. So next slide, please. A second component of looking at truck travel patterns within Huntington was also looking at truck routing behavior. So in addition to looking at the number of trucks that are driving on various roadway segments, we also looked at different route combinations between origins and destinations using streetlight data. So together we combined the daily truck volume data and the routing data to create this heavily utilized truck map, heavily utilized truck route map. So this is showing roadway segments that have high percentages of truck traffic as measured by daily truck volumes, as well as a relatively high percentage of route combinations that trucks are using to get between 2 points. So again, you'll notice a lot of the same usual or the same routes that we saw on the previous map. Many of the east-west corridors, such as 3rd, 5th, and 8th Avenue, as well as the north and south entry points between the city. It's also important to note different north-south connectors across the railroad that sort of divides the city east-west, mainly East Street, as well as Howgary Boulevard coming up from the south, as routes that are heavily utilized within the city. So next slide, please. So finally, using the existing designated truck routes and the heavily utilized truck route map that we just showed, we put together this recommended, or I should say, preferred truck route network map. So what you'll see here is a lot of the routes that we saw on the heavily utilized truck route map that we showed on the previous slide. And the idea here is that we're not recommending any new designated truck routes. All of these are existing truck routes. We're simply saying that these are the routes that we prefer trucks to use so as to minimize impacts on passenger vehicle traffic and sort of preserve other neighbor residential character of the city. The routes that are existing designated truck routes that are not on this preferred truck route map aren't necessarily recommended to be removed or not designated as truck routes anymore, but we're saying that they necessarily shouldn't be signed so that truck drivers are not using them frequently. And the idea again here is to create a more coordinated and integrated truck route network within the city so that we can prioritize roadway improvements that help truck mobility in the future. So next slide, please.
And I'll actually add here that based on some conversations that we were able to have with our stakeholders, we've even made a couple of tweaks to what's shown here on this map. So just better aligning where we know that we want to have trucks in the area and where we want to direct them where we can. We wanted to remove North Boulevard, 8th Street, and also Hal Greer Boulevard. And when I talk about 8th Street, particularly south of 8th Avenue, the character of Hal Greer Boulevard is changing as we work to integrate a more complete streets feel on that corridor. And so that's going to provide us with additional opportunities for more multimodal travel. And US 60, as well as 8th Avenue, will continue to serve as alternate routes for trucks that are trying to access places where they might previously have gone via Hal Greer Boulevard.
Thanks, Allison. That's a really good point. Go to the next slide, please. So using this recommended or preferred truck route map that we had on the previous slide, we began to do field observations to look at different intersections that trucks are traveling frequently that we want to prioritize future truck investments. And to do that, we looked at specific roadway characteristics, including curb radii, lane widths, overhead obstructions, traffic control devices, viaduct clearance heights, signage, and then difficult merging areas for trucks. So in the pictures that you are shown on the slide, on the right-hand side, you can see an example of an intersection with insufficient turning radii for which trucks can't commit or can't complete a northbound right-hand turn without going onto the sidewalk. And the left picture on the left-hand side is a great example of an intersection where, although it has sufficient curb radii and stop line distances from the intersection, trucks are still going onto the curb. So there's significant off-tracking evidence in this picture, particularly, even though that there's proper and adequate intersection geometry to accommodate truck turning widths. So next slide, please. So using these field observations, we came up with some short, low-cost improvements, as well as some long-term, higher-cost improvements. So with the short-term improvements, we recommend installing adequate signage on the recommended truck routes. Again, in many of these places, there is some signage, but it could be sparse. So again, to encourage truck drivers to use the recommended truck route, more significant signage is an easy way to start to influence travel behavior. We also recommend relocating stop lines and increasing turning radii at specific intersections to accommodate wider truck turns. And then as the city of Huntington continues to develop and travel conditions and
I have a question here for on this slide.
sure.
Short-term low-cost improvement. I mean, that's great here, but do you have a specific location for these low-cost improvement, like where to relocate the stop lines, for example, where to increase the turning radii? Do you have a specific physical location?
Yeah, we do have specific physical locations. A good example is the intersection of A Street and 8th Avenue. The existing southbound approach stop at the intersection should be relocated further back just so that trucks can make.
I mean, you have the list of that, right, in the report. You have the list for these location.
We do include it in the field observation. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question, Salim. Thank you.
Okay, because then we can target these. I mean,
Yes.
That's the reason I'm not really, because the whole purpose of this study, we need to have an outcome, like an outcome to start doing something to improve these truck routes. That's the whole thing. I mean, either a short term or long term. And that's what, then we can meet with the district and central office to see how we can do this improvement and with the city also. That's what, and of course, long-term high cost, that's something we can revisit in the future because it's a high cost. Okay.
Yeah, no, thanks, Salim. I think that's a really good point. And just to round it out, the long-term high cost improvements are increasing the clearance for one railroad viaduct to make a crucial north-south connection to under the railroad underpass, just to allow for greater mobility throughout the city, and then also reconfiguring the US 52 northbound exit ramp, just to increase the merge distance so trucks don't have to stop and hold up passenger vehicle traffic coming off the ramp.
I'm going to ask you, for example, we said we have an existing truck routes and we have referred. Of course, if we need to discourage the trucks not to come to certain routes, do you think possibility if we can contact Google Maps or these companies to do something in their mapping system to discourage the trucks not to use these routes? We can use this approach or no? This is not practical. Because of course we can't stop the trucks not to use the Holy Grail. I mean, legally we can't do it, but if we can do like other approach, contacting like Google Maps or other maps, commercial map, not to advise the truckers to use these routes. We can do this.
I think that's something that's worth exploring. Yeah. Perhaps examples where that's been done in other jurisdictions.
Yes, because in Ohio, they did that approach. They contacted GPS companies not to guide the trucks to use certain routes, and they've been successful. Okay. I know how they did it, but something that's a low cost. I mean, it's a low cost. Discourage the trucks, not, for example, to use the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail would be a complete street roads and actually there's no trucks. I mean, I didn't see trucks. Usually when I drive there, I didn't see any trucks they are using the Holy Grail. I didn't see zero. But we need to avoid that by maybe contacting Google Maps or other maps, commercial map, to do something in their system, not to advise the truckers to use, for example, the Holy Grail, something like that.
Okay. No, that's a good point. That's something we should look more into.
Okay. If possible, I mean, how to do it. Of course, we will not do it unless the city agree, I mean, or on the state. But we need to have that option available to us.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead, Allison. Or I should say, Sam, you can go to the next slide.
Oh, sure.
So we had one Mentimeter question to sort of gauge public interest in terms of how we should be prioritizing these truck improvements. So what is the most important to you in thinking about trucks traveling in Huntington? We have a couple options here, such as improving intersections for trucks, installing more truck routing signage, improving bridges and viaducts, and then coordinating truck travel patterns. So again, feel free to go onto menti.com and use the code shown on the slide, and we can get those results on the screen.
And as everybody is voting, I'll just note, and this kind of goes to Salim's earlier point, there were some specific intersections that will be noted as good candidates for improvement. But this is probably a continuing conversation and should really continue to be supplemented with field observation. A lot of times just going out there and understanding where degradation is happening on the curbs, or if we're seeing some of the off-roading that's happening that Andrew pointed out on the previous pictures. Those are good indications that we're going to need to focus some additional attention in certain locations.
Yeah, like Allison, like one intersection always there's a complaint about that 8th Avenue and 8th Street. That's always a problem, always complain there. I mean, complain for all modes of traffic. I mean, pedestrian, cars, and trucks. Everybody complain about that intersection, especially on the westbound on 8th Avenue and 8th Street, that intersection.
And that's been a complaint for a while, hasn't it, Salim?
Yeah, yeah.
I think, yeah, that's what I thought. But it seems like there's a lot of priorities when we think about trucks traveling in Huntington, which is understandable. I mean, I think that's one of the takeaways that we had as we were looking through this with our partners from Carpenter Marty, is that there are, I think, quite a few opportunities for improving the system, whether it is those specific intersection level improvements, thinking about how to better sign and route trucks throughout the city, and then of course some of those larger scale improvements, which I appreciate Andrew left a couple of notes in the chat about the East Huntington Bridge weight restriction. That's something that we certainly want to note and adjust within our plan, just understanding that that's going to continue to be an issue for that bridge and that route going forward. Another issue that we know of that Andrew mentioned are the height restrictions that exist on our viaducts. The closest that we get to the approved, or I guess the suggested minimum height requirement, is on the First Street Viaduct, which is 13 feet 6 inches tall. So just something to consider. We know that there are certainly those constraints that are somewhat unique to the Huntington area that are going to continue to be a consideration as we think about how truck traffic is routed through the city. All right, are there any other questions or thoughts that folks have about the truck route study?
As you know, I mean, already for the improved bridges, already we start improving bridges in the 5th Street Bridge that's under construction currently. We have 2 bridges under construction, 8th Street Bridge and the 5th Street bridges.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Salim.
And that really heavy investment by the state. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, that, I mean, that's great. That's definitely going to continue to be an asset
well, if possible,
for the routing.
If possible, for this study, at least for these two bridges, if we can recommend certain signage. Now, currently, everything's under design and construction. If we recommend certain signage to go at the 5th Street Bridge and 8th Street Bridge, for example.
That's a good recommendation, Salim. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts that others have? I appreciate everybody sticking with us as we went through our two studies and participating in the polling exercise.
Alison, thank you. Really, they really are good studies. I mean, that's very helpful for us, and it's a good. I mean, it's good studies. I mean, quality and quantity.
Well, thank you, Salim. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody this evening.
And we're not really for the truck routes. We know it's tricky. I mean, nothing in your hands or your sub-consultant. We know it is tricky. I mean, just we need to use the best of that situation.
Absolutely. All right, so just a quick recap on next steps. We have our draft reports that are out for review right now. Our stakeholders have had the opportunity to take a look at those and offer some initial comments, and that comment period will continue. Following that, we will make some revisions to those and finalize the reports for both of these studies, at which point everything should be concluded. So thank you again. We appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone and those that joined us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.